All right, well, it's 10 o'clock here, so we'll go ahead and get started. And good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. A couple housekeeping items before I kick it over to Josh and Joel to kind of walk you through their presentation around fraud today. But we want to make sure this is as interactive as possible, so please feel free to use the chat feature as they're going through the presentation, and I'll be monitoring that and I'll ask the questions as they come up. I think a lot of you know the premise of this presentation is around fraud, and I'm sure each and every one of you have seen it in some form of way here over the past couple of years, with it becoming much more prevalent and really evolving quite a bit too. So today we wanted to bring in a couple of our experts here, Josh Bloss, who is our Chief Security Officer here at Busey, and then Joel Ramos, who is our Deputy Chief Risk Officer as well. So really with that, Josh, Joel, I'll turn it over to you, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And thanks for the introduction. And like was said here, I think we're looking for feedback from the group and interaction. So don't hesitate to raise your hand, drop a message in chat as we go through this. I think these conversations are always much more impactful when we get some, real conversation from the group of things that maybe you've experienced or encountered and share that out. I think structure here that as we go through this, we have this set up to basically go through some of what the current scams are today. We'll talk about our own experience of what we see from the banking side, as well as how the attackers are maybe modifying some of their approaches in the current state of the industry. And then I think from there we'll talk about some of the tips and tricks that we have, just everyday things that you can do to protect yourself, and maybe just change your mental model to how to adapt to the fraud and how it's happening today. I don't know, Joel, if you have anything else you want to say before we get started.
No, no, you hit it right on the head. This is a growing problem, a big issue that we're seeing with our customers, and I'm glad we've been given this opportunity to talk to all of you.
So at the outset here, obviously the numbers are big, right? And I think they're probably still understated. One of the statistics that I've quoted to our board just around how big this problem is globally is the fact that there are countries where their entire, their GDP is made up of scams being the biggest portion of their revenue. Southeast Asia, I think Bangladesh and some of those countries are in that space where like 40% of their GDP is tied to scam industries that, the numbers are much bigger than 20 billion that's getting reported internally. But what's shown here is that layout of it's continued to grow. And obviously some of that's driven by, I think, that awareness of how to report things, making certain that we're getting better data around that. And we'll cover this in a little bit more detail later in the slide of, how to report things, what you should report, all the information sharing, because I think that is it's a critical piece of this, because ultimately it comes down to the best way to defend yourself is to know what's out there. And I think sharing experiences that you've had, and not being ashamed of it, because I will say that too, and we'll get into some of this, is this happens to everyone. There's no amount of sophistication, intelligence, anything that's going to stop you from 100% being able to identify and stop every single one of these. I think the only thing we can do is just continue to build those muscles and make certain that, we continue to be aware of what those common, tools, techniques, and processes that attackers are coming with, so that you can be as prepared as possible. So we're going to get right into, I'll say, the interesting part, the data piece of the volumes here. It's a good overlay, but I don't think it really changes how we all react to it and how we interact with it. So, I think starting off here, I'm going to kick it over to Joel and have Joel sort of talk through some of the major scam types that we're seeing. And I think this is probably an opportunity for the group too. If you've seen these specifically or seen flavors of these and you have things to share, certainly don't hesitate to drop that in the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Josh. Yes, impersonation scams is probably our biggest fraud type that we see, specifically impersonations of even Busey Bank. So what you'll end up seeing is that you'll get a text message or an email claiming to be, in this case, Busey Bank's fraud department with some suspicious or purporting to have some suspicious transaction going through your account. it's going to create a sense of urgency that's going to drive you to click on their link or to call the number that they've given. But it's very effective. And in what's the way that's effective is that it's finding some trusted source, or it's trying to give the perception it's coming from a trusted source. So your bank, the IRS, a Social Security office, or even some common provider like Amazon or Apple or some other, McAfee, uh, uh, virus blocker, things like that. Those are very common sources that they try to impersonate in order to really give it some level of urgency, authentication, and then it gets people to click. I will say, when you do see that, the best thing to do is just contact a known number related to that service provider or your bank. Call the back of the card. That's your best defense there. Don't share any information with anyone that's sending you a text message or an email over the phone. And definitely, if they do get you to log into an account and they're asking for some PIN that's required for multi-factor authentication, do not share that ever with anyone over the phone. The next scam that's pretty common that we see is a family emergency or grandparent scam. And that's, again, trying to create that sense of urgency where you're going to get a phone call from someone that's purporting to be your family member. It could be a grandchild, it could be a son or daughter, claiming that they're in some emergency and they need help. There's going to be a few things that's going to be interesting about that scam. It's going to be very urgent. They're going to tell you that you might get a phone call from somebody else that needs to conduct a transaction, bail, for example, things like that. They're also going to tell you to keep it quiet, not share it with other family members, their parents, etc. All of it because it'll break up the ruse. And that's becoming more and more effective because of AI voice cloning. AI tools are able to clone voices very well with very little audio. So if they have about 3 seconds of audio, which they can get from social media or other posts that kids like to do these days, it's really easy to quickly start mimicking their speech pattern and getting a very similar voice that can be hard to distinguish when they're putting you on some emergency or urgent basis. The best thing there is just to hang up quickly. You should definitely verify with a family member. If they are asking you to keep it secret, do not keep it secret, share it. It'll give you some insights into whether someone was really traveling out of the country and whatnot. So there's also a safe word. You could always create a family safe word that if anyone is in an emergency situation, there's a simple prompt that you can give and they should be able to give one back. The fraudster isn't going to know that, and that would be a good way of just quickly verifying over the phone if you're talking to the real person. I will say lottery, prize, and advance fee scams are
okay.
That's all right. Are very common as well. Still, we're still seeing a lot of instances where they're claiming that a lottery has been won or a prize has been won, or that there's some inheritance that's coming your way. And what the point of that is to get you to pay something in advance. It could be a delivery fee, a transaction fee, a wire fee, something to start the transaction going. They're going to send you something. It's most likely going to be a fake check, or it's going to be a wire that's going to overdraw. So what you've just done is you're going to send them money. You're going to see something come in a few days. Your bank is going to reject that amount, and you're going to be stuck holding the bag. So that is a very common scheme. It's one that we're still seeing more and more. We're seeing also job offers. If you've been following some of the news lately, there's a lot of fake jobs out there online through Amazon and other sources that are looking for people to apply. Part of it is to get your information. Others is to scam you into thinking that there's an easy job, an hourly rate that you can get. And what you're going to have to do is provide some information, as well as provide your bank information for the paycheck to be paid into. So that's one that is very common. In many instances, if you are receiving some payment or do have a job like that, and they're asking you for something as simple as keeping your computer on or to log in certain sites, they may actually be using you as a money mule or some other unwitting participant of a bigger fraud.
Yeah, I think in this place too, I mean, I think the last two, the overpayment check fraud, the job offer to be good to be true, we're seeing, again, different flavors of the same things on those, with Zelle and some of the other P2P money transfers where they will send a payment to you for something that you're legitimately trying to sell. And they'll say, oh, can you wire me back or send me back the difference? I accidentally hit, 1 0 too many. And then they'll call and cancel those payments so that you're on the hook for all of it, and you've outlaid money directly to them that you're never going to get back. The job offer one, certainly one of those things to look out for. Family and friends. One of the scams there is hired for a remote work position, and they'll tell you, hey, you need to buy equipment on your own. Here's you need a laptop, you need displays, you need mouse, keyboard, all of those things. Here's the link to the approved vendor. Go purchase the equipment, give us credit card information, all of those types of things where, a normal enterprise job, they're never going to have you do that on their own. They have their own, acquisition process for and procurement for those things. They should be shipping it out to you. Something just, I'll say same flavors of the same types of scams, but just more nuance that they're adding to these to make them feel legitimate. And it's just one of those where they are getting more sophisticated. You just have to pay attention and be on the lookout for things that look a little bit abnormal.
Hey, yeah. Josh and Joel, we did just get a question that came in, and the question is, why can't a bank immediately identify a bad check or a fraudulent cashier's check? Could you talk a little bit about that process and kind of how banks determine whether or not it's fraudulent?
Sure. In many instances, banks are processing the check. It's being sent so that you have two different banks here. You have the bank that's receiving the check, for example, and then a bank that's paying the check. The receiving bank will process the check and will send it over to the paying bank in a batch with other payments, right? Other checks with it to that same bank. And other banks are doing the same, sending it to the same paying bank. That paying bank will then process those at the end of the night. So there's a 24-hour period in which any fraudulent transactions are being identified and being sent for return. If you have opened an account recently, you probably would have seen that the bank will send a bank hold notice or a bank hold schedule. So for certain checks, banks are going to hold a certain amount for a longer period of time. And in many instances, that's in order to identify fraud and be able to send back bad checks. There is a minimum amount that has to be available to individuals right away. That's about $100 and $500 the next day, depending on the size of the check. But anything over $500 will usually be held for at least 3 days. That'll give banks the opportunity to identify if it's a fraudulent check and send it back. So if you're ever in doubt and you ever get a payment like this, especially one like if you were selling an item on Facebook Marketplace or on eBay and you get a check, I would say before returning any overpayment, make sure that check clears. So give it the 3 days, give it enough time for it to check and process into your account, and then you can figure out whether you're going to give them an overpayment or not. That's probably your best way, because if it is overdrawn or if the customer has put a stop payment on that, within 24 hours, generally, they'll know and be able to you'll see that money coming out of your account without you doing anything, because it'll be returned back to the sender.
The other thing to focus on that front is, like, yes, the bank is always going to do what we can do to try to validate that, but like Joel said, there's a process of how we're exchanging that data. Especially whenever you're selling something. I just had this happen myself, and my process around this. We sold a piece of equipment and got a cashier's check from the individual that purchased it. But again, if they're not coming from the same bank that you personally bank with, part of the validation that I did was, while I was sitting there with the person, was I looked up the bank, found their phone number, called their help desk line and said, I want to validate that this is a legitimate cashier's check, that you can show the transaction on your side. They will verify that for you to be able to prove out that, yes, this person came in process the transaction, and this is a legitimate cashier's check from their institution. And then even once you deposit, because once you deposit that to your bank, like Joel said, they're taking that cashier's check, they're sending that batch information over to the other financial institution. If the financial institution on the other end has never processed this and it's completely fraudulent, you're gonna have money that shows up in your account until that settlement happens. But the moment they try to settle it up and realize that cashier's check isn't legitimate, that money is going to immediately be withdrawn. And for something that's a physical product, you're never going to get that back, more than likely, especially if they're in a different state or different circumstances. I mean, it's going to be a whole issue to try to retitle and get information back where you want it. So that's the other piece here, and we'll cover some of this in the personal protection piece. But since we're on the topic, that's one of those things that I think, especially in today's day and age, taking that additional step, it feels, it may feel a little bit confrontational with the person in front of you giving you a check for large amounts of money, but taking the additional step certainly puts everybody's mind at ease, just to verify that it's legitimate and everything's above board.
Right. Yeah, I would say the next scam that we see very often, especially with elderly and maybe even young men, is romance scams. And this is one that comes with, I would say, it's a long con in many senses, that it starts off with conversation with someone that they met online, or someone that reached out to them randomly, or it could have even been as simple as a supposed fake or wrong number, whether it be a wrong text or wrong phone call, and they strike up a conversation. And before you know it, they're starting to talk and become friendly. And then there is this sense of maybe emotional intimacy that's happening between the two. And then that's when a crisis usually happens. Usually the fraudster is going to claim that they're in some financial problems, or they have a family member that became medically ill, or some other issue that they need some money. And they're never going to, I shouldn't say never, it starts off by dropping those simple hints. And because of the bond that's been created, it ends up becoming an offer where the victim ends up offering the money because they care about this person. Some of the telltale signs that it's a fraud is that you haven't met them in person. You're having there might be instances where there's been attempts to meet, because that's another part of the con, is that there's attempts to meet in person, and for various reasons, it doesn't work out. Planes are delayed, or something got canceled last minute, or again, an emergency came up. There isn't also sometimes the ability to do video calls, because they'll claim that because of work hours or poor internet service, or for some other reason that they can't get on a FaceTime call. Other times is that when you do look up the person, it's a little too good to be true. A very good looking woman, or even a famous person. I think that's where you need to start asking questions, as far as like, why would like Liam Neeson be calling me asking me for help, right? Like, that doesn't seem very plausible. So starting to have that skepticism of, is this too good to be true? The other thing that you'll see is that they're going to escalate intimacy pretty quickly. It might come again from phone calls, or wanting to ask more personal questions about yourself, or give up information. It's going to be all fake information, but trying to give up some information that makes it seem like they're trusting you. And then there's going to come that ask. It may not be a direct ask, but it's going to come in the form of there's emergency and help would be appreciated. And usually another telltale sign is that they're going to ask for a gift card, a wire transfer, or crypto. Those to me are the three vehicles of moving money that should always give an alarm when someone's asking for that information. If they're US based, there's other ways of providing person-to-person payments that are a little easier than wire transfers. Wire transfers, what makes them very, very good for fraudsters, is that it's immediate. Once you set the wire, it's out of your account. It's harder to retrieve. It's easier for someone to pick that up at a Western Union or at their bank immediately, so the money's gone really fast. Gift cards, also very untraceable. It's hard to make a claim that it was stolen. It's hard to get information on the fraudster as they're redeeming it. So gift cards is another way. And crypto, again, that is generally the type of currency that is used by most fraudsters in bigger scams, because it does become harder to track as far as where that money is going or how that cryptocurrency is being moved around. But you have to really think about the broader story that you're hearing. Everything starts to as you put it all together, it's not quite adding up. It doesn't seem to quite make a lot of sense. It's really good to start understanding what the situation is before really giving away any money, especially to people that you haven't met in person and don't know in a much better way. So this is one I have to say is one of the biggest scams that we do see with our elderly population within the bank. It's one that we work really hard. For banks, there are requirements for us to report elder financial abuse or elder financial exploitation. And this is one of the biggest ones that we report. And unfortunately, it's really hard to convince victims that they've fallen for a romance scam, because in many instances, they are lonely. They are looking for some level of connection. So for them, they want it so bad that it's hard for them to come to terms that it's not real, that they've been duped. And in some instances, they don't even care that they're being duped. They just like that they're talking to someone on a regular basis because they tend to be lonely or don't have any other connections beyond this virtual one. I will say, along with romance scams, pig butchering is the bigger operation behind all of this. They all follow a similar typography when it comes to contacting individual strangers. And again, it can be through text or a dating app or some other way, talking to them about some opportunity or trying to become friends with them. Building that trust becomes very big. And then from there, introducing something fake. So it could be, again, an emergency, an investment, or a deal that they need help with. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, they're withdrawing money from your account. They're getting you to send them a ton of money. These are big operations. These pig butchering farms are big. There's been lots of reports of pig butchering farms out of Southeast Asia, where they just hire hundreds and hundreds of people to just do this, to contact people in America and all over the world and try to convince them into sending them money, or just to build that trust and eventually get them to release funds. So this is a big operation, and it is harder and harder to stop, because the volume is just so big here.
Yeah, I think all of these individual types of scams, I think the other thing is they're all flavors of the same stories. I'm an avid reader. I'm a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut, and he had a lecture a long time ago where he basically said, there's only 5 or 6 different unique stories that authors write, and it's sort of the same for the attackers. They're all following a similar playbook. There may be individual nuance of how they're coming to the conclusion, but I'm sure a lot of you look at the pig butchering and you go, well, that's just a Ponzi scheme with more steps. And you're absolutely right. It's eliminating the case of trying to manage multiple funds across multiple individuals and try to keep that return churning. And it's just all fictionalized as far as what you're seeing in the investment platform, because they can make all of that look pretty legitimate on the surface. And they do a good job from the development standpoint to make it look legitimate. And so I know early on, we talked about the fact that there's this case of there's really no amount of intelligence, sophistication that is going to make you foolproof. And I think this is part of the message here too, of even in the pig butchering space, we see individuals that are part of financial institutions that on the surface should look and seem like they know better. And so I have this slide in here basically just to talk through that from the perspective of, a CEO of a financial institution that was fairly large, 3 to 4 years ago, went through this entire scenario of, having the relationship built with them, finding a supposed opportunity in the crypto space when crypto was continuing to boom. So on the surface, that seems plausible. He invests his personal funds, sees that he's getting returns. They may even have been transferring funds back to him to try to draw down on some of his earnings. And it got to the point where it seemed, from his perspective, that The opportunity was too big to pass up, and he really should be investing a broader set of funds into this. And pulling from the levers that he had, he started doing it from the financial institution that he was the chair of. And so, all of this escalates to that point where, like it says here, he had $47 million invested with them before they pulled the rug, and he recognized that all of it was, manipulated and fake, to the point where, the FDIC had to step in, claim the bank, seize the bank, return it to operation, sell it off, and help customers restore the funds that had been embezzled out of the bank. And so, again, this is back to that overarching comment of, this guy was in banking for 30 years. He certainly had his own internal fraud department. He's seen things himself, yet everything was so buttoned up and polished that he was fooled by it. And so it's that case, and we'll get into this later, of if it's too good to be true, like really taking a step back and making certain that you're asking some more detailed questions, because that's the only way that you're ever going to identify that it's potentially fraud. So with that, I think we're going to get into a little bit of what are the attackers doing? What are they changing? What are the things that you're going to experience and see tactically in your day-to-day life, and how to identify some of those activities as fraud. Social engineering is the big one here. It's something we deal with, I'll say, internally for our own bank employees, but also on the customer side. It's the same tactics that I think Joel's already started to hit on here, of where they're pretending to be from an authority. It may be from the IRS, it may be from the bank, it may be from the fraud department, somebody that looks credible on the surface. They have enough information and enough details behind it to make it seem plausible, and hopefully get past that initial sort of like mental burden or mental hurdle of saying, yeah, this seems plausible, I'm going to go ahead and let my guard down, and then let's get into the next phase of this, which is, okay, there's urgency or fear that's being levered here to say, okay, we've got to do something immediately, because if you don't follow through with this, something bad is going to happen. Whether that's your accounts are going to be drained, or you have the ransom situation with a family member, or something else that's causing you to immediately go past all those immediate steps that you may take to take that judgment of, is this valid? Is this real? And try to get you out of that deep thinking phase and just act. And so there's those two. Obviously, the reciprocity piece, I think talked about that, of just building that relationship over time to where they're doing something that seems like they're helping you out. You may feel obligated to return the favor. There's just a lot of little levers that attackers are pulling on that get beyond the rational judgment phase. And so that's sort of the theme on all of these is, what is somebody trying to do or trying to get me to do with either the words they're choosing, the way they're approaching me? Why does this, it should raise the red flag and sort of get the spidey sentences going of something's wrong here, and try to pull on that thread. Don't run away from it, I think, is the message. Spoofing, this is another big one, and I think this is one that I think from the banking side we're constantly dealing with on our customers' behalf to try to make certain that we're identifying these things proactively and taking action against them. The caller ID spoofing is an easy one. You can easily make your phone number look like any other phone number you want it to. So this is, on the caller ID side, like Joel mentioned, it's always best to call the number on the back of your credit card. If you're receiving a call from somebody that's purporting to be from your bank or from your financial institution, always call them back, especially if they start asking questions that we consistently put out messaging around. We're never going to ask for your PIN. We're never going to ask for your social security number over the phone. There's a whole list of things that we don't need you to give to us to validate you when we're calling you. The reverse is true. If you're calling us, we're going to validate that you are who you say you are by going through that checklist. But the reality is, if we are, if a fraudster is calling you and they start asking questions like that, it's fine to hang up on us. Even if you think it's a legitimate call from us, it's fine to hang up on us. In fact, we're happy that you're taking your security seriously. We will always, give you kudos for that internally. I think there's a story here from, the double-edged sword of trying to be that support and validation piece over the phone is, It's probably been 3 or 4 months ago. Pope Leo was calling his bank in Chicago, trying to get his phone number and his address changed for his mailings on his account. The customer service rep from the bank fielded the call, went through the validation process. Pope Leo's asking and saying, "Hey, I need to change my information." And they were like, "Well, you've got to come into the branch." And he goes, "I can't do that. I've got obligations here in another country, trying not to give too much information." And so in the midst of the whole call, he goes, "What if I told you I was Pope Leo?" And the customer service rep from the bank hung up because they thought it was so implausible that this was how this person was handling this. And so, I think this is we've given the same training internally of like, we are going to be professionally skeptical and we expect our customers to do the same. And I think that's for the best case for everybody on this front. And so ultimately he got it all worked out. But the message there is like, it's always better to be skeptical. And yeah, it may cause a little bit more hurdles along the way, but the alternative is losing access to your financial information and having that be a much bigger ramification in the long run. Email, domain spoofing, website spoofing. I think these are, again, for folks that maybe don't live in the space, this is one of those that is very hard to identify without digging in. And I think the point here is, you have to pay attention to where what the link says that you're clicking on may say one thing, but where you actually go whenever you visit the website may be something completely different. So we see a lot of times where people will either email, you'll have a link in an email that'll say it's going to Amazon.com. You click that link and it's going to take you, like this case, it's Amazon-security.net. That's not a domain that Amazon owns. And so on the surface, people look at that and they go, maybe Amazon does own that. But I think you have to take that additional step and go, why are they sending me to this link and pretending that it was sending me somewhere else initially? And so it's really adding up all those various factors to identify like what is plausible, what's the rationale for why why this is looking slightly off. And so those are the harder ones, I'll say, where it looks plausible on the surface that they might own that domain. The other ones where it's the character replacement, those are certainly common. And hopefully it's a little bit easier to identify, but not always for sure. Because there's a lot of times where you have a long domain name and they slip in an extra character in the middle of that. Your brain reads it as the whole thing looks legitimate, and you almost have to parse it individually at the letter level. And so again, it's not necessarily that you need to be checking every single website that you go to, but it's really understanding that attack pattern of, I'm getting sent a link for a reason. Now I need to understand, like, do I believe that I should be getting this link through a text, through this email? Now I'm clicking on it, something doesn't match up. Those are all of those individual red flags that lead to that discussion of, that mental discussion of, okay, I probably should be a little more sensitive to what I'm putting into this website. And then, same thing on the website spoofing. Even if the domain name doesn't match, we see these all day, every day of somebody that's sending a link because they're scraping a web page and making it look exactly the same as our structure is. And they're trying to convince you that this is the login page for our bank. Go in and input your information so that they can scrape it and steal it.
And hey, Josh, we had one question come in about the domain name for Amazon there under the email spoofing. And the question is, what is wrong with it? Because it does look like it could be a legitimate domain for Amazon. So how would you go about verifying that? Would you go to Amazon.com and call customer service directly to do that? What steps would you take there?
Yeah, for something like that, like again, where it looks plausible on the surface, I'm immediately looking at it and thinking, okay, if I'm going to AmazonSecurity.net and it's pulling up a security page and it's asking me for a login, I'm going to take a step back and say, and I'll say from a non-technical perspective, right? There's some technical things you could do that I don't expect anybody in the normal course of their day that they're going to do. As far as like looking at domain registrations and looking at ownership on those, that I think is a step too far for most people as far as advice goes. But like, I simply look at it from the standpoint of, what are they trying to get me to do? And if it's a login, and I know that typically I'm going to Amazon.com or accessing it through the app, I'm going to go do that instead. And then I'm going to go to their security page through the drop down of whatever website that I typically interact with and see if I'm getting the same alert there, whatever they're purporting to be. And then, yeah, if it's that case of like, I still can't figure it out, yeah, pick up the phone, call their support. Because also it's one of those where the communication to them may also alert them that, hey, somebody's trying to spoof your website, convince customers, steal their information so that they can go take action on it as well. And so there's a dual purpose there, right? Of like, if as we receive those of customers that are reporting, hey, I got sent this link, we're using that as intel to go take action against it. Amazon's the same way, any of these large companies. So it's just going back to the source of how do I normally interact with this and baseline for normal and figure out what abnormal looks like.
I do have a personal experience with not Amazon, but Apple. Very similar. I got an email saying that my Apple Pay, that there was a fraudulent transaction. It looked extremely legitimate, the text message. But it did have, similar to this one. So one of the things that I think for a large company like Amazon or Apple, a .net domain, their extension, is already kind of a red flag that wouldn't be a common necessarily for a large commercial company like that. It most likely be at a .com. So it was very similar to that, where it had an extension that seemed unusual. It wasn't their typical apple.com. I actually went out to the Apple website. One of the interesting things about Apple is that there's almost no way to contact Apple on their website, which made it even more difficult. So now I'm sitting there. I finally end up just calling their helpline, which is more like their Apple Care helpline, and running it through them. And they said, yeah, that is not a legitimate text message. And then they sent it on to their fraud. But it was really trying to go through the actual proper commercial, and not clicking the link. Because again, the link could spoof, right? Which is going to be the next thing that Josh is going to talk about here. We can spoof a website to make it look very legitimate. So the reality is you got to go to the source where that you're comfortable with, going to the link that you normally go to, or to the website that you normally go to verify that, and not follow their map basically of getting to things that look like it. So but yeah, ultimately it was fraudulent, a fraudulent text message, and I did not respond. But some of these companies, especially the larger ones, it is harder to find someone to call or talk to. But I would still go that route rather than just clicking the link.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I was just gonna say that's a good point about the .com versus the .net. I will say, like, we purchase a whole host of other domains, and the entire point of that is to redirect them back to, like, for us, it's Busey.com. So Amazon does the same thing. So even if you do the lookup and they may say, yeah, they own AmazonSecurity.net, it's registered to Amazon. Realistically, those are empty domains that they own, and they should redirect back to whatever their main brand page is, or to like the dedicated sub page that is for this specific purpose. And so that's the other piece on this, and I think it's a good one, is if they're sending you and it's a full page that looks like it's a .net and they've created all this, like, the other thing is, like, always be skeptical of that, because any company worth their salt nowadays isn't going to go set up the exact same page on a separate domain, a separate site URL, when they could just redirect you back to their main source.
Yeah, and as a follow-up question to that, and you may be touching on this later, so if so, we can address it then. But if you do click on a bad link, what does that do to you? Does it introduce malware to you? Are they more so trying to get your login information? How does that work? And then what should you do if you do click into that link?
Yeah, so again, it's going to depend on what the main purpose from the attacker standpoint is. A lot of the times whenever you're getting sent a link like this, it really is to harvest credentials. And so they'll do what's called a replay attack. So if they've built that sort of pixel perfect website spoof that looks exactly like your login, they're going to get you to enter your credentials. They're taking that in real time and replaying it on the actual bank website. Bank website is sending out the 2FA step that you would normally get. and you're going to go ahead and enter that in the spoofed page. They're scraping that immediately, replaying it in the other page, and now they have access to your site, to your financial institution. So that's one method. The other method, and I'll actually flip to the next slide here, is some of the current techniques here for what's called click fix now, but there's a few different varieties of this where you may get prompted from the site of, hey, it's a pop-up, there's a security alert, it looks like it's from Windows, but it's actually being presented from the website itself, and they're going to give you this type of information. Go ahead and do these steps. And so, I think whenever you look at it, you go, okay, I'm really compromised by malware. I need to go do something. It's Windows, it's telling me to do this. But essentially what this is doing is it's allowing, like, you are prompting your computer to go install something on their behalf. And the moment that you've run this thing, it's silently going to install the malware in the background. Theoretically, it's going to give them some sort of remote access into your device, is typically how the malware works. It's the remote access Trojan, or the rat is probably the term that most people have heard. And suddenly they either have direct access into your device, or they have something that's installed on your device that's scraping your activity and then sending that information out. So if you're accessing a bunch of different services, whether that's your email or it's your financial institution, they're basically picking up screen scrapes of every activity that you're doing, sending that back to the attacker, and they're cataloging all of that for future attacks. So it could be the case that there's malware being installed. It could also be the case that they're just trying to scrape your data. Clicking a bad link in and of itself isn't necessarily guaranteeing that you're getting malware installed on your device. I will always recommend, no matter what, if you have clicked a link that you've identified as malicious or suspicious, go ahead and run the virus scan on your computer, and just have it check and make sure there wasn't anything installed that was unexpected. I think virus scanning on your devices have gotten a ton better for folks that are running Windows. I think there was always a joke in the security space in the long way back of what Microsoft provided was never sufficient. They've gotten so much better over the last 15 years that realistically what you get default out of the box, you really don't need anything else. You don't need to pay for a McAfee. You don't need to pay for even like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne for a personal license on that sort of thing. Defender does its job well enough for a PC, and Apple's the same way with some of their virus protection now. So it's just one of those of being aware of, like, you're getting prompted, it's telling you something bad is happening. Immediately go into, close the web page, because if you close the web page that you were just interacting with, and this all goes away, it's not your actual device that's telling you that this is a problem and it's detected something. Go independently run your virus scan. Go make sure that you're checking all those boxes.
So Josh, these click fix attacks, they will more often than not pop up whenever you are on a web page, is typically
Correct.
how it is. So if you're sitting at just the dashboard, you have nothing else running on your computer, you're not going to get one of these popping up. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. This is all browser. It's all going to be interaction with the internet. They're presenting stuff to you through the web page. It's going to look like a legitimate pop-up that you may get from any other site, but if it's happening through the browser, just immediately be suspicious. I think we touched on this a little bit. The AI-powered attacks, certainly, I think its scalability is the advantage from the attacker standpoint. The deep fakes, the voice cloning, those all existed, but they were a lot harder to accomplish. And AI has just made that a lot easier for folks. And so it is 100%, it's harder nowadays to identify fraud because of the fact that it can do very, very specified targeted attacks against you. We used to have a concept in security that was, the difference between phishing and whaling was phishing was generic. It was a scale game of, I'm going to send out 2,000 emails and hope that I get one hit back from an attacker standpoint, versus whaling, which was, I've identified a person that has a significant amount of money. I'm going to customize an entire attack chain to make this as plausible as possible, build their trust, get access to their accounts. That concept is essentially being foisted over to all of the generic phishing social engineering. they're able to do that at scale now where they couldn't before, all because of the capabilities of AI. So where it used to be, you'd get the really poorly written phishing emails that spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes because it was obvious that English wasn't the first language of the person that's writing the email. That's basically gone. And I think the degree and level of difficulty in identifying fraud and identifying phishing, social engineering has become harder because of that. And then it's really circumstance and context that you have to pay attention to more than grammar, spelling, anything that looks incorrect. And I think there's the other angle with this too that I know we didn't cover on the scam side, but it's one of the unfortunate things I'll say with the space is the other piece that they'll prey on is the shame aspect a lot. And so I know I've gotten these and I just chuckle at them because I know what they're trying to do. But for a lot of people, it's scary the moment you get it, where you'll get the email that says, hey, I found out that you visited these illicit sites and I have all your information. I'm going to release it publicly and embarrass you essentially. And they'll go even down to the level of where I've had them pull and scrape like Zillow pictures of my house to say, I know where you live. I know everything about you. I'm going to release all this information. And people will immediately go, I don't know what they know. And I got to respond. And they know where I live and they know all this stuff. But it's an automated process where the best thing to do is delete it and move on with your life. But it's that instantaneous reaction of, oh no, like something bad's about to happen to me. And I think they know enough about me because they pulled out, this hyper personalized information either from LinkedIn or Facebook, public records, all of it that looks very, very specific to you that you just have to be very cognizant of to know that it's pretty easy to find that information, as unfortunate as it is, just through social media nowadays. And then this is really just the summary of everything else we've covered up to this point. This is a business for attackers. Unfortunately, they're very good at it because they have a lot of practice. And so this entire attack chain, I think the biggest pieces that we've hit on here is taking your time. You don't need to act immediately. Slow down anytime you feel like you're getting that pressure from some sort of interaction, whether that's the text, it's the email, it's the phone call. Take a beat, make certain that you're thinking clearly before you immediately act. And because the immediate action piece is 100% what the attackers are trying to convince you to do, especially whenever they get time to make the ask of they want money, they want gift cards, they want a wire transfer, they want something from you. These upfront pieces, the social engineering, the long con, that's all going to feel slow, which makes the urgency ask feel it works against you because you think, oh, I've been in a relationship where I've talked to this person for long enough that this doesn't feel urgent because I've been talking to them for weeks. But it's that context of the moment and how they're asking in that moment versus maybe the relationship that you think you had with this person. So it's paying attention to all that context. And again, making certain that you're stopping, thinking, calling somebody else, and really listening to them whenever you do call them. Because I think Joel mentioned, and I've had this situation too, where people have called me and I've told them 95% sure this is fraudulent or a scam. Don't do anything with it. And they go, I don't know. I still sort of believe it. Like if you're calling somebody that you trust them whenever they give you the answer, even if it's not the answer that you want to hear.
Josh, before we move on to the last section of this, you talked about for the click fix pop-ups that Microsoft and Windows will automatically do the virus scans. Do MacBooks do the exact same, or are they going to have a different process there?
I'm gonna show my ignorance for a second because it's been a while since I've run a Mac in my own household. I know that even if Apple doesn't provide one directly, there are probably a few recommendations as far as virus scanners that you can install that are, I'll say, above board that you can look into. I know Bitdefender has one for Macs. But beyond that, I would say there's probably some more research, and maybe this is something we can share after the call, and I can pull some information. I probably should know this offhand, but I know we run enterprise scale antivirus, anti-malware on all of our devices, Macs or Windows, and we don't use the out-of-the-box tooling. So it's a little bit different, enterprise versus personal, and I would probably need to look into that a little bit more to be certain.
Okay. Yep, we can follow up with that one. So not a problem.
The last section here is probably going to be the roll-up of everything we've talked about to this point. So we probably won't spend a ton of time on each individual slide here, but we'll share these slides out after to the group. This is a lot of, I think what we've hit on already is the personal skepticism piece. Again, it's not rudeness. Nobody should take it as being rude. If somebody does take it as being rude, they've either probably not experienced fraud themselves or they're trying to scam you. Because I think in today's day and age, like we said from the outset here, 1/3 of Americans have experienced this in some way, shape, or form. And so if that's direct, I'm certain that out of that group, you probably, if you haven't experienced it directly, somebody that has, or multiple people that have. And so I think that's always the piece. I know I talked about it earlier with an individual that I sold a piece of equipment to. I told him up front, I'm like, look, I work for a financial institution. Unfortunately, I see this stuff every day. I don't take offense, but I'm going to call your bank because I'm taking a cashier's check from you. And again, he's seen it too. At this point, everybody, adults in the room understand like this is a real problem. It's not a case of I don't trust you. It's a case of there's enough opportunities out there in the world where taking that 30-second or a minute extra time shouldn't be offensive to anybody. And I think we've hit on this too, but this isn't just isolated to any one group. I know I saw statistics, I think earlier this week even, talking about Gen Z, that 18 to 30-year-old cohort, where they're actually falling for these scams at a rate 3 times higher than any other age bracket. And it's because of the fact that they're embedding these things in social media. They look like they're not scams, like they're not asking you to specifically do something, but they may just be giving you bad financial advice, getting you involved in crypto or something that's not actually a reasonable investment for somebody, getting influencers behaviors to get people to take action on things. And so again, the scams keep evolving. It's a matter of being professionally skeptical and saying, is this too good to be true? What are they actually trying to get out of me? Financial accounts, lockdowns. I think we touched on some of this, but the MFA, two-factor authentication everywhere that you can, and password managers, I think are probably the 2 biggest ones that I constantly preach to everyone on a personal side. My family laughs at me because I bought password manager subscriptions to folks for Christmas or for birthdays and those sorts of things. Yep, I'm the cyber nerd that does that, but I honestly think it's one of those most important things of you don't need to boil the ocean. You don't need to do this for every single account that you have, but certainly, email where you're getting password resets through, it's all your financial accounts, whether that's brokerage, bank, anything else where you may be getting, IRAs reporting things out of those places. And then I'll say the other ones nowadays are really any of those, I'll put credit cards in that mix too. Any of those like sites that you're purchasing things on. So if you're using, Walmart.com and you have a subscription, or Amazon for all of your Prime, put those in the same password manager, because that's another one where somebody gets access to it. Yeah, they may not get a ton of money out of you, but they will go purchase big things and try to ship them to, unique locations where they can't be traced back to them, and just use that as one more way to get a quick buck. So think about really where you're exposed and focus on those first, but you 100% don't need to go try to do every site that you set up on a random day to go on your password manager.
And from a bank day-to-day, what we see with victims is that usually they've given out their multi-factor authentication code. So even if you fall for the scam and you've entered your username, password, and then that's the fraudster is then entering that into the legitimate bank site to gain access. If you have your multi-factor authentication, you'll get a text message with the code. The fraudster will then ask you for that code, or it'll prompt you on that website to provide that code. it's very important that you don't ever provide that multi-factor authentication over the phone to anybody. It's one that banks aren't going to ask you for that. So don't give it away. That's one of the, as soon as you get that and then they ask you for it, it's best to hang up and go look for a different source. And then the second one is the transaction alerts. Again, a lot of the scams that we see with the victims that come through our bank are generally, they haven't set up a transaction alert. The fraudster is claiming that a transaction has been stopped or prevented. If you set up transaction alerts, you would have seen that as well. So any fraudster trying to tell you that there was a fraud committed on your account, you're going to be able to double check that through your own method, whether it be email or text, whether there was an attempt on that. So setting up transaction alerts is another good way to protect yourself.
And before we leave this slide, we got a question a while back, and I figured I'd wait until we got into this protection part to ask it. But does using a VPN protect your data from being scraped or copied, and will it prevent the attackers from getting info? So I guess kind of first, before going into that, could you explain a little bit about what a VPN is for the group, just in case some individuals don't know, and then talk about how it could help protect your information if it can?
Yeah. So VPNs, I think VPNs have gotten a I think people have put a lot of trust in VPNs over the years because of the fact that there was a point in time when connecting over a, like, your Starbucks Wi-Fi, for instance. VPNs help protect in those situations because you're creating a dedicated tunnel that is wrapping all of your activity is going through that tunnel that is not getting reported out over like the ISP or the connection that you're making to a website while you're using that public Wi-Fi. Things have changed a little bit on that front, and this is going to get technically wonky, but the browser protections that are in place now are essentially doing what the same thing that a VPN is doing for you if you're using Chrome or any of the major Firefox, any of the major browsers that are commercially available now. A VPN isn't going to stop you from visiting a bad website and stop an attacker from scraping your data if you're on their site. A VPN is going to protect you from the situations where you are using somebody else's Wi-Fi, using somebody else's connection, and it's a malicious connection and they're scraping it from that source. And so it's really solving two separate problems. And so I think VPN is going to protect somebody from being able to say, hey, you're visiting facebook.com. They're not going to be able to know where you're traversing to on the internet with the VPN. But your biggest risk for something like this is more of, I'm visiting a bad site, I'm interacting with something. Just VPN is not going to protect you from that. So that really is a case of like understanding what it's solving for and what it's not solving for. Certainly useful. We use VPNs at the bank, but it's because we're creating a dedicated connection to our data centers that are hosting information, and we don't want that going over the internet. But for everybody that's just, I'll say, a typical consumer accessing the internet on your day-to-day, VPN is really not going to stop a whole lot. Not to say it's not a bad thing if you're paying for it and continue to use it, but just know that it's not going to stop something like this where I'm entering information into a site that's malicious or accessing something that's malicious. That's really going to be your browser protections more than anything else. Okay, we got a couple more slides. I know we're sort of coming up on time. We'll get through this, and hopefully if there's any questions at the end, we can get to those too. So universal red flags, I think we've covered almost all of these at this point. And again, we'll share this deck out too, just so that everybody has it for reference. But I think the big ones are the urgency. It's the secrecy pieces, callers asking for verifying identity and sharing information that you wouldn't normally share. Those immediately should raise the hairs on the back of your neck, saying, okay, this feels a little bit off. So keeping these things in mind, especially as you go through your day-to-day, I think is important. And it may not be one of them, but I think the combination of multiples of these should instantly raise the red flag of like, this is potentially fraud. I need to hang up and call this person back separately. Family safe word, we talked about this earlier. This is something that I've talked with my own family about. We've not actually implemented transparently, I have a 5 and a 7-year-old. I don't know how useful that would be for me at this point, but I think especially as you deal with, older people in your family, college kids going off to school, family that maybe you don't see on a regular basis, having that word there, that's that safe word, trigger word, to be able to say, hey, give me your safe word whenever you call in asking for some sort of payment that isn't normal, and making it unique enough that an attacker couldn't just come up with it, um, is a good sort of last resort piece of, let's verify that this is legitimate, especially if it's something that is like, hey, I've kidnapped this person. You really probably don't want to hang up. Like, your gut is not to hang up and be like, I don't believe this, because stranger things have happened in the world. But I think if you have some of these things in place in advance, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with the moment. So it's one of those, certainly consider it. Again, it's on my radar of things that I need to do internally for my own family, but I think it's a good one for everybody to consider, and just back your mind, talk about it with the family and see if it's something that is actually reasonable for you. And then the last two slides here, I think what to do if you've been targeted. We talked about a lot of this already. Stopping contact, changing compromised credentials, making certain that if you've entered something in a malicious website, that you are recognizing that and going ahead and updating all those passwords, not just in the place that you entered it for the site that you entered it, but if you that's the biggest benefit of the password manager, is the fact that it's easy enough to create a completely unique password where it's not even just a modification. If you had some long complex password and the only thing you did between sites was iterate a number on the end, attackers are going to be able to guess that, and they will guess that just through iterating through trying the increments at the end, whether that's cycling through symbols at the end, cycling through numbers. That piece of it's gotten a lot easier too, just with technology and the ability to run millions of tests pretty quickly.
Josh, on
And
the
then,
topic of password managers, and I know we're kind of closing in on the end of time here, but we've gotten a couple questions about them. The first one is, do you have any recommended password managers for individuals? And the second part of that question is, are there any risks associated with password managers that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so this is always a fun one for me. Of from a risk standpoint, I look at this and I go, I really hate to give recommendations, because I think if you're referring to the risks, I'm certain you've probably already seen over the last few years. LastPass had issues where they had breaches in their environment that exposed people's passwords. The infrastructure they're using and how they're securing this is 100% the piece that is the most critical of what you're sharing and what they have access to. And so there are a few companies out there. I think we've mentioned them up above here. 1Password, Bitdefender, those are online cloud-based. The use cases that it's easier to go interact with it. I think I'm very concerned about my own data and I don't want it sitting anywhere on the internet, but I still want to use a password manager. I would look at something like a KeePass. So it's KEE and then pass. And so that's one where you store it locally. It doesn't ever go anywhere else. You have your recovery password that you don't enter anywhere else, and that becomes your keys of the kingdom for all of your passwords. The downside is you need to figure out how to share that across your devices, because it's stored locally. So you likely need to go put that into a Google Drive or a OneDrive or something like that to be able to access it from another device. And that's a little bit more friction, but it's much more secure on a consistent basis than going with a vendor that's providing a cloud hosted solution like 1Password or LastPass or Bitdefender or any of those. So it really becomes a personal risk tolerance on that front. I'll say, just from a personal standpoint, I use 1Password for all my family type information. Again, I'm looking at monitoring from what comes in from all of my news reporting, looking for things like 1Password has been breached or having any sort of information like that, where my immediate next step is then go, okay, they have some sort of compromise. I need to change all my passwords and I probably need to move everything down. The hope is that doesn't happen. But if it does, again, it's a step. I'm just going to go reset everything and move it all to a new password manager.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then the last two slides here, this is just the who do you contact slide. And so we've summarized a lot of the various working groups here of how do you report some of these things? What are some of the things that you should be considering? And so this is just another resource for you. And again, we'll share all this out so that you have all that information.
And let me add to that, if we're a bank, so when we see our customers engaging in something that might be not typical for their behavior, and you come into a branch, it's not going to be unusual if they ask you questions about it. Be honest about it. So if you are being held ransom, or there's a blackmail scheme around information that they are claiming they have on you, be honest with the banker. We can bring that support. We can bring law enforcement. We can help and prevent that. You might even, if you're in a situation where there's a caregiver that's actually committing financial abuse, where they might be forcing you to go make transactions, and we identify that you're not alone, we may ask you to be alone for a minute so we can talk to you. Use them as a trusted source. We have lots of resources. We are always in contact with law enforcement, and we can do the best we can to get you some assistance or even recover money.
Awesome. Well, Josh, Joel, thank you very much for your guys' time. I think this was pretty informative for a lot of those individuals that joined here. And just so everyone on the call knows, this is being recorded, so we will get that posted to the Gold Timers website here probably within the next week or so. And we'll also share the slide deck with you all as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.